today. As you mentioned, it's a unique time right now. And so many authors do not have the opportunity to talk in a brick and mortar shop or even in a library, all sorts of venues right now. And so again, it's just a pleasure. And it's like you said before, we're able to reach people that otherwise we wouldn't because of the distance. I don't know how many people have had the opportunity to read this book. And so what I thought I would do initially is perhaps give a brief summary of the book in the 5 years, the 5-year journey that was in finding the right education program for our son. Our son was and is still a very bright child. He's actually 33 now. And he has a different learning style that in some ways the traditional school system still doesn't fit. This is the first time this has happened. So you'll have to bear with me. I think I'll go in higher pitch. As I said, our son has always worked well when he's worked hands-on. And even as a child, just building with Legos, or as he got a little older, motorizing a scooter, taking it apart. These were just ways that really he seemed to shine. And as he got a little older in grade school, we noticed that he was having certain problems because of his ability to process information. And because of that, this also grew more difficult as he grew older, particularly in middle school. Because once he started in middle school classes and the homework kept piling on, he became very overwhelmed. And by 8th grade, started really taking an emotional and a physical toll. And when that happened, it also affected his grades more and more, to the degree that they put him in a special interlude program for emotionally. And just the fact of being placed in a program like that, even if you're not struggling emotionally, it can. So what we ended up doing, we found out about a private school, and this school really personalized its learning. And because of that school, he really started to shine. He had an opportunity to explain and ask questions in a classroom setting. He always socially about doing that sort of thing. And because he pretty much absorbed information like a sponge, if he could see it as a visual learner, he did very well on projects. And that type of school worked out very well for him, but it was college prep. And he became more and more interested in working with his hands in schools that really focused on career and technical education. So in the case of our son, to do that, he returned to public school. And because he returned to public school, he had access to Career Center, and he had the opportunity to work in their auto technology program. And auto tech with John just simply clicked. He could work with his hands, he could figure things out, he was always a problem solver. And with that experience, he really gained confidence again in himself. He went on to a tech school, he became a master auto technician, and eventually owned his own business in Colorado. So we had to our story, but unfortunately, a lot of children don't. So this book was really written for those students, for their parents who are seeing their children struggling. And I really believe that in many instances, if these students are given an opportunity to work with others, to think by standing on their feet, we could have a lot more children out there that are experiencing the joy of learning And not too often, or too often this happens, it's become more a fear of failing for children. So on that note, I always like to start a few excerpts, beginning with one experience with our son that always shone, and it was his passion. And at the time, I knew he was happy doing this, but it was only in looking back that I realized how it made sense and why he loved it, why he had a passion for it. And on that note, it's only a few pages long. I'd like to read. It was a golden day in early November 1998 when Matt, 11-year-old son, made his first outdoor climb. Watching him prepare to ascend a cliff above the fast-moving Potomac River, I had to keep reminding myself that he knew all the basics. He had been practicing them for weeks with the other members of Sport Rock, an indoor climbing center in Northern Virginia. The day of reckoning had finally arrived. My husband Tom and I initially had been very wary about letting him literally climb the walls. But while we'd winced through those first few months, our son had confidently learned the ropes. As I realized many years later, it was the ideal sport for him. Ascending a summit, like a spider deftly moving across its web, was both a physical and mental challenge. He had to study the rock formations and crevices, to decide which equipment to use and how to position his body. But all the effort was worth it. Harnessing every muscle fiber and brain cell to reach the top of his precipice was exhilarating for Matt. He was able to focus on one thing at a time, at his own pace, and he had no one to compete with but himself. Now, at least indoors, it was as if he had scaled mighty boulders all his life. Nonetheless, when Matt stood at the base of that 50-foot rock face, I said a few prayers quietly to myself. Yes, I believed that God is with us at all times. But how much did our higher power know about carabiners? When it was time for him to ascend, Matt tied himself to his rope with a figure-8 knot. Then he secured the rock brown leather harness. The boys were doing top roping. It is considered the safest method for beginners because the climber is always protected by the rope anchored above. As he moved slowly toward the top of the cliff, I kept reminding myself that he had a belayer on the ground below him, watching his every move. His partner went to slacken or tighten the rope to keep Matt from falling or to catch him if he fell. Tom and I sat on the ledge above with several equally nervous parents. From our vantage point, I could see Matt, but I could not see him completely until he neared the top. He was about 5 feet away from it when he came into view. I pulled out my camera, slung the strap gingerly over my neck, and held it at the ready. Matt was concentrating very hard, studying each nook to choose his next grip while positioning his legs against the rocky ledge for balance. I wanted to take a picture of him facing me, but I also wanted to make sure that I did not disturb him. Matt was concentrating very hard, studying each nook to choose his next grip while positioning his legs against the rocky ledge for balance. I wanted to take a picture of him facing me, but I also wanted to make sure that I did not disturb him. Finally, Matt stopped for a minute to rest. I could see his blonde bangs below his helmet, his harness strapped snugly over his gray fleece sweatshirt and black pants. And I knew this was the moment I wanted to capture. Finally, Matt stopped. I could see his blonde bangs hanging below his helmet. His harness strapped slowly and snugly over his gray fleece sweatshirt and black pants, and I knew that this was the moment that I wanted to capture. Matt, I called to him quietly. Our son slowly looked over at me, unaware until that moment that I had been watching him. Our eyes locked, and he broke into a grin. A broad grin. As Matt beamed at me, I quickly took my first shot. Then the shutter clicked again and again. I knew he had to finish his climb, but I must have taken a dozen pictures before I put the camera down. It's been nearly 20 years since I took those photos. I've kept one on our refrigerator and even alongside dozens of other family gems. It is that picture of Matt, grinning broadly as he neared the summit, that tugs at my heart the most. Scaling the cliff that day, that was the happiest I would remember him being for several years to come. Years that were as rocky as the ledge he climbed on that crisp sun afternoon. Looking back at that special moment in time, I realize why it still stands out so vividly in my mind. Matt's climb up the cliff had clearly demonstrated his strengths and how much he would accomplish when given the right equipment. I unfortunately would discover over the course of many years, the tools offered in the traditional classroom did not work for him. Although this is a memoir, it is also a mystery. And until we figured out what was not working, wasn't working, it was very difficult to know what program for him to see, what program for him to go to. But only after reading some literature about multiple intelligence theories and the various ways that students learn did I become an advocate. Because once I realized that it wasn't our son, that it was the program, it changed everything. So in that sense, I picked two other excerpts, one in which things worked really well and one in which the programs failed. And the first one I wanted to read, and it gives a very good example of what didn't work, is about John's papaya project. Then there was the papaya. In early April, Matt had to write a paper about vegetation that grew in minutes, and he chose to write about a papaya. He accompanied Emma and me, Emma, his older sister, to one of the branch libraries one chilly afternoon so he could check out some books on his assignment. I tried to make this a brief visit since Emma needed to get back home to work on her own schoolwork. Matt had no luck with his online search, but while he was on the computer, I found 4 good print sources. I was still leafing through the rainforest books when Emma came over to me in the church. You know, Matt is looking at snowboard books, Emma commented. I realized this was one of many times that I helped him to do his work, thinking it would help him shave some time from what was bound to be yet another long homework assignment. Consequently, since he had to run a search for the right subject online, I let him leaf through books on the wrong subjects briefly. In my mind, it was lesson enough for him not to be allowed to take the contraband books home. While Matt might have excelled in getting sidetracked, I was running a close second in rationalizing it. Matt had 2 full weeks to finish his project, and because it involved, he was engaged. He completed on time an essay about the papaya, enthusiastically gluing a picture of the juicy fruit he had found online to his title page. He patiently finished the bibliography and the report cover. But what he most enjoyed doing was making a mold of the papaya. I remember him sitting on the kitchen floor with his watercolors and stack of newspapers, slapping one layer of pasty paper to a mold of the tropical fruit fashioned out of Play-Doh. He also used real seeds from a papaya he had bought at a neighborhood grocery store. He painted the outside dark green and inside of it shades of pink. His diligence and pride in his work reminded of me when he was a small child, showing me the photos he had selected for his grade school autobiography. I imagined how pleased he would be to hand in the work that he had spent hours creating, and wished there were more assignments where he could work with his hands. A few days later, Matt returned home with his essay and his papaya. "How did you do on your project?" I asked him, smiling broadly. Without any expression on his face, Matt replied, voice, "I got a C." "Why?" I asked, dumbfounded. "Mrs. DeVille and I said I was supposed to build a model of the plant, not the fruit." I suppose some children would have been angry that they would have thrown away their papaya. Matt simply set it down on the kitchen table and walked away. I was angry about what I perceived as a teacher's insensitivity. Surely she knew about Matt's difficulty following directions and his record of incomplete assignments. He spent hours writing and putting together his report. Didn't that count for something? He spent hours making an amazing, lifelike model of the fruit, sliced open to reveal its juicy pulp. I walked briskly into the living room where Matt sat on the sofa, immersed in a television program. "I can't believe Mrs. DeVille would give you a C. You worked so hard on this." I thought that my outrage over this might at least make him feel better about his low mark. Matt just looked up at me. He remained silent and expressionless. It was clear that regardless of how he really felt, that he didn't want to talk about it. He resigned himself to working hard at home and not succeeding at school. You know, I've saved that papaya over the years, and it's still very much a tangible reminder of what can happen to a child when they work hard and they convey what they've learned, in his case, with paper mache and hours of creativity. And also, he worked very hard to learn about the papaya. He had the content knowledge. He did basically everything he needed to do to understand the lesson, to understand how fruits grow in a tropical climate. Yet, because of the traditional way of teaching, he was basically punished for not producing it the way it was set to be done. So, without any question of a doubt, this was an approach to learning that did not work for John, and I believe it does not work for a lot of students who are creative and think outside the box. But there are also times when the program or his learning experience just delighted him and he shined. And I wanted to read one example of this as well. And it was when school itself was not working out for him, but I had a good friend at work who said that our son reminded her of her own days in school. And she thought that there was an internship program that she could offer him in the summer that would be stimulating and where he would learn a lot. So this chapter is called College Media News Service, and I'd like to read a little bit about it. It was only a few days into summer vacation, and Matt was already bored. Then out of nowhere, he asked me if he could still work at the radio program I had mentioned to him earlier in the year. I was surprised that Matt even remembered the internship that my friend Ellen had recommended when she'd found out his problems at school. Then again, Ellen also mentioned she would pay him $100 a week for his work, and that he could even bring a friend. Sure, he can start anytime he wants, Ellen told me when I asked her if the offer was still good. Matt invited his friend Mark to work at the news service with him. They had been long, fast friends ever since Mark moved a few doors down from us when Matt was in 4th grade. Their first internship day was July 10th. The studio itself had a college dorm filled to it, newspapers scattered on a coffee table, and several young men and women immersed in conversations about what they should cover that day for their web-based stories. Once we arrived, I stayed long enough to introduce the boys to Ellen, who, busy as usual, was just about to dash out the door. She had to make a hastily arranged meeting and only had time to say hello before handing them over to the internship coordinator. She promised to talk to the boys about their assignments once she returned in the afternoon. Even though she was barely 5 feet tall, Ellen's piercing dark eyes and tell-it-like-it-is manner left no doubt that she was a force to be reckoned with in this media world. Yet she was also one of the most generous people I knew, always looking for ways to help the underdog and sparing no expense when it came to social causes that she believed in. Matt was someone she decided to take under her wing. She had no patience with the traditional school system, and when she saw potential in bright young students who were slipping through the cracks, she found ways to spark their creativity. Having the opportunity to work on interesting projects seemed like a formula that might work for Matt. The first assignment for the two boys was an easy one: to accompany one of the college students to Capitol Hill to get their press credentials. When Matt came home that evening, the first thing he said was how much he liked his new boss, especially after she disapproved of his green floral shirt and his skateboard pants. "You look like a frickin' ragamuffin," blunt-spoken Ellen had told him, an observation that apparently won Matt over immediately. He promised her he would wear something more professional the next day, and as promised, after dinner, we shopped for clothes that were more presentable for the news service: khaki pants and 5 plaid cotton shirts. After telling Tom and me about his wardrobe malfunction, Matt proudly showed us his press pass. Below his media credential, it read, "Studio Producer 2001. What a contrast from middle school and its classroom settings. Matt, now doing these challenging creative projects, loved the challenge of piecing information together, just like he loved building things. We were impressed with how the radio internship helped him to work independently through complicated issues. After a few days of attending press conferences and congressional hearings, Matt and Mark were given their first assignment. The internship coordinator sent them off to do a man-on-the-street interview about skateboarding at Freedom Plaza, a promenade on Pennsylvania Avenue that had become a popular spot for skaters because of its wide open space, granite steps, and low ledges. Keeping the skateboarders off the sidewalks had also become a major headache for DC police officers. Matt and Mark interviewed pedestrians and a few full-party skaters who practiced kick flips between episodes, scattering at the sight of an approaching cop. The boys asked the policeman, and later a National Park Service officer, why they weren't putting in more skate parks in the DC area. Not surprisingly, their story put a positive spin on skating and explained why, instead of getting down on skaters for being on the streets, there should be more skate parks. Throughout the summer, Matt and Mark covered a variety of stories that would appeal to college students. I was impressed by the quality of Matt's work, and I asked him how he managed to put so much information together in so few words. Did he have an editor to help him write the script? What script? Matt replied. I didn't write anything down. I just did it. How was it possible for Matt to put together well-crafted news reports when he couldn't stay awake to write a few paragraphs for his English schoolwork or his standards of learning tests? How could he focus for hours on producing work that interested him when he was unable to concentrate on much simpler work at school? As I said before, this memoir had become a mystery, but when we found out what worked for him and what we thought could also work for others, it became a mission. And that is what this book has become, a mission. And I'm glad I had an opportunity to share it with you. And at this time, I would love to take any questions or just thoughts. And if you don't wish to ask it in person, again, as Christy told you, you're welcome to use the chat line and ask it to me. I will let Christy begin here.
All right. Yeah, thank you so much, Paula, for reading those passages. And I'll just start real quick by saying I appreciated a couple of particular things. One, just the way you highlight how connecting with others and sharing stories is so important in not only helping us feel like in certain situations we're not alone, but opening up the door for different ideas and opportunities, like the opportunity for him to go and work as an intern on the radio station, the radio program. And I also loved what you said earlier on, that experiencing the joy of learning is so much more important than the fear of failing. And I've seen that, you know, because you're right, kids learn in so many different ways. And I think there's so much pressure to follow a certain path and to fit a certain mold, whether it's the trajectory through education or where you end up after education. And so I appreciate that. I think as a parent, that to me stands out, because that's what I much more would like for my kids to experience, that joy in learning versus the fear of failing and not meeting up to standards that just aren't going to fit their needs. So I really liked that. I really appreciated that. Yeah, and so if anyone has questions or comments, you can either drop your name in the chat box, you can raise your hand if you'd like to through the participants window, and you're welcome to have a little one-on-one chat here with Paula. We've got plenty of time for questions and discussion. And you can also—
Well, I guess I can start with a question to myself. And it's something that occurred because of, like you said, what's happening now. And with the pandemic, we can't do the hands-on learning, particularly 6 feet apart from each other. But also because of technology, there's still an opportunity to collaborate online. I was particularly curious about auto technology, because that is what made my son shine. And of course, to do that, you have to be in a garage. You have to be physically located to a car. And I was curious, so I did a little research about this just actually yesterday and how that's being handled. Um, and there are programs out there, I looked for high schools where they are allowing students for free to take online courses. They're training teachers before that to be familiar with distance learning, how to still teach students without them actually being physically in the garage. So with a combination, I've seen videos, ebooks, e-workbooks, and hopefully in some instances, like the Career Center, students will still have an opportunity in the summer to work as apprentices at some of the auto tech and auto repair shops. Because I know they're open and I know it has to still be done, and it's just a different way of doing it. But part of being a good auto technician, as well as so many other careers, is you are a problem solver. And I think in one instance, I think it's Christy also pointed out that through this, we'll also learn of other ways of working together.
Yeah.
I see John Moore would like to ask a question.
Well, I guess first of all, more of a compliment, and I just want to thank you. It was a wonderful book, and I really enjoyed reading it. And for me, it really resonated because Alex is just like John, and everything. When I'm hearing your passages, you know, it sounds like you're describing Alex, just the challenges that he's had through traditional school. You know, right here he's a senior now, and we're just getting him across the finish line, barely pushing to get him across the finish line, and it has been a challenge. But then he'll go up and spend 3 hours putting together a sailboat and making his own sailboat and sailing up and down a lake. You know, one of your passage about climbing the mountain, and how it's so interesting to see how engrossed he can be over his activities and cars, you know, his love of cars. And I'm so thankful also for our Arlington Career Center, because he's been there for the last 3 years and got an internship last summer at Volvo, and it's just been so impactful to have a non-traditional opportunity for students. And it's anyway, I appreciate all the work that you put into it, and sharing your experiences, because it helps, because I feel like, you know, while we were at school a month ago, right before Corona, and all the parents are, oh, where's Alex going, or what, you know, everyone's like, what school is he going to? And everyone's all about, you know, around here in Arlington, where every student has to go to some Ivy League program and, you know, become a lawyer or whatnot. It's refreshing to see that there's other parents that and students that are going through the exact same path. So thank you, and I really and truly enjoyed the book.
You know, at this point, I'm not sure on your end how much is being frozen, but I would like to encourage anyone that has a question to perhaps use the chat line to type it in. So I guess it's another way of adjusting to technology when you have an unstable internet connection, which keeps reminding me is what I have at the moment.
Thanks for mentioning that, Paula. It's that's one of the hazards. So many benefits to doing these readings online, and then there's a few hazards, and one of them is, you know, I think there's so many more of us who are using the internet, especially on the weekends, than we ever were before. So, yeah, thank you everyone for your patience with the technology. And as we, yeah, it looks like Harold has a comment for you, Paula, in the chat box.
Harold, I'm looking forward to
Paula, I'm going to unmute, but I can write it in the chat also. You seem to be ahead of your time And a lot of places around here, people have said, we don't need any more MBAs. We need technologists and plumbers and electricians and computer experts. And I think that's the wave of the future, at least for the time being. And I think the approach to education, the key, I think, would be how teachers are taught to understand different learning styles. I don't know if you got much of that.
I heard you saying something to the degree, I caught most of it, but near the end you were talking about teachers. And I presume that might have been related to professional development and themselves having to learn a new approach to reaching their students.
Yes, I think that's true. You know, he was also just talking a little bit about the press to have students earn MBAs and things like that, and that you're ahead of your time in encouraging others to look at it differently, that, you know, we do need a lot more kids getting involved in the technical trades and computer technologies and things like that. And Harold, I completely agree with you. We're lucky where I live that my son's high school has developed an apprentice program so that students who are not interested in going to a four-year college, or perhaps that just doesn't fit their needs, are able to begin pursuing the technical trades, because there's such a great need, especially as people begin to retire. And I have seen my son blossom in the last year in wonderful ways. And I think as a parent, it's just such a joy to see your kids take off and enjoy what they're doing, and, you know, see them succeed in wonderful ways. And it has, you know, and it doesn't have to fit what everyone else assumes that we should all be doing. And I just, so I appreciate, Paula, your work that you've done. And, you know, the more that parents like you are willing to bring your stories to light, then I think the more that society in general will begin to accept those other opportunities and options.
Well, I mentioned in the end, the epilogue of the book, how after this all developed and I wrote the book, I had an opportunity to do a radio show. And in the process of doing that, I also realized that career and technical education is just part of this overall umbrella called project-based learning. And throughout the 4 years I've done the show, I had many guests on from the Arlington Career Center's Arlington Tech program. And these are college-bound students in science, technology, engineering, math, but it's also hands-on learning. And for example, a student that might be interested in mechanical engineering, one of the career technical education courses they would take would be auto technology. So you have that hands-on going and studying problem solving in an actual garage and actually be able to apply what you're learning in your textbook to something tangible. And in the process, and this is so important too, these other competencies that employers are looking for, your ability to work with others, your creativity, your ability to communicate. These are things that all students, all adults could very much be in demand, and in fact are. There's been studies where employers, I think it's up to 90%, are saying what they really want and have such a shortage in is students that have those essential. They might have it up here, but they can't work with others. And so this is what I found in doing the radio show, that this approach can benefit every student and every adult.
So, Christine, I see that you have a check mark, and I'm not sure if that means that you have a question. I just want to double check before we move on to Lori's comment in the chat box.
Well, I just have a comment because I am retired. You know, I've been in Fairfax County schools, and so I'm a retired, educator as well as a counselor in the school, both ways. And when you were talking about learning styles, we did have learning styles. We knew about learning styles until No Child Left Behind came and SOLs came into place. What has changed is we're now teaching to the test. And I think that needs to change. I think there needs to be more problem solving. I think there needs to be more hands-on, and we do need to bring back, like you said, learning styles back into our schools. And I think a lot of creativity went to the wayside once that happened. I don't see changes like would like to see back in the schools and bringing all this back. And you're right, the trade schools did go to the wayside for some time. I hope I've been away for a while to think they're coming back, because once again, we're talking about the need to reach every learner and be able to have opportunities for all the children, not just the college bound. So that's what I'm looking at from my perspective. So.
Thank you, Chris. I see on the chat line that there was a comment made that I'd like to read, and it is Lori DeRenzi. And Lori, I know, is a teacher, and it's a private school that takes on public school students who are having emotional difficulties, behavioral problems, and so she certainly has a real challenge in dealing with students, not only academically, but in other ways that can also interfere with their ability to learn. And Lori, I'd like to just read what you have written here. Not just teachers need to change mindset, but society. The trades are important. As a teacher of special education, I stress this to my students all the time. They are always told they need to go to college to be successful. As the wife of a plumber, I let them know that college is not for everyone. Thank you, Lori, for that. And it's certainly food for thought, I think, for all of us. Do we have any other questions? I know there are a few other educators out there and a lot of parents and a lot of experiences as well.
Paula, perhaps while we're waiting to see if anyone else has any other questions, do you want to talk about the resources that you provide in your book as well?
Yes, at the back, and I hope many readers, get back to the resources page. And what I have here, and by no means is it's an exhaustive list, several listings of institutes, academia. There's also advocacy programs and organizations. And I think one of the ones that certainly was most helpful to me and any other parents, that if you deal with special education at all, you know how complicated the meetings can individualize education plans and how overwhelming it can be. And there is one website called Rights Law. It's all one word, WRIGHTS, law. And it's the leading website about special education law as well as advocacy. It specializes in information to help parents, educators, advocates, and attorneys work with the school system to ensure the best services for children with disabilities. It produces several legal publications and publishes an online blog. One thing I guess that this reminds me of is that in this book, there were a lot of different issues. And one of the one that I actually have 2 chapters on is about twice exceptional children. And these are students who are very bright, but they've been identified as having learning disabilities. And unfortunately, the way school is set up, there are programs for gifted children, and there are programs for special education students, but you rarely find one program that serves both communities. And I think Wright's Law, another publication called 2E newsletter, are just a fount of knowledge in this area, because there are still too many students that find too many hurdles and roadblocks that don't have to be there if they're courses. And Wright's Law is certainly one of them. I just only bring up two more. These are national associations. One is the National Association for Career and Technical Education. And it's also just a wonderful resource for specific careers you might be looking for and what you would need to do to prepare for them. The other one that also is amazing, I think, is the Buck Institute of Education. And it's specifically about project-based learning. It's a gold standard for schools that are teaching with that approach. So that and several more are listed in the resources at the back of the book. And I thank you, Christy, for asking that.
Certainly, you're welcome.
There's one other issue that I think is also important, and I only mentioned it in brief during the excerpts that I read, and that is that our son had a sleep disorder, and it was a major issue in his ability to learn. There is an organization called Narcolepsy Network that, again, is also for advocacy in this area. I think one of the problems, it certainly was one for our son, is particularly when it's undiagnosed and you cannot stay awake in class, you fall asleep like our son did, it's mistakenly thought of as something being done on purpose, that you really are just trying to shut out class, that you're not interested in it, so therefore you're voluntarily shutting down, which you cannot do. Neurologically, you cannot make yourself fall asleep. Our son had a sleep test, and that's how we discovered it. His REM activity, his rapid eye movement, was not normal. And because of that, he was just extremely tired during the day. And if you're extremely tired, you're not going to be alert. You're not going to retain information. It affects your memory. It just has all sorts of complications. And that is another issue that is raised in this book.
Thank you, Paula. We have about 4 minutes left. So I just want to open it up one more time. If people have any last minute questions or comments, it looks like Georgette has a nice comment for you in the chat box, Paula.
Thank you. I appreciate that as far as my presentation, and I look forward to you looking forward to reading the book.
And again, I'm just going to drop in the link for people if they would like to check out the book online or place any orders. And then also, I wanted to drop in Paula's Facebook page, if that's okay with you, Paula. Is that a way?
Oh, no, that's fine. And
okay.
My Twitter is also good too.
What is your Twitter? I can't remember.
Oh, it's the handle is @Lazor CTE, which is for technical education, 54, which I kind of hate to admit, but what the heck is the year of my birth.
Perfect.
So again, that's Lazor, LAZOR, CTE 54.
There you go. So that's in the chat box too.
And if you do go on the Twitter account, you'll see that it's not only promotion of the book, awareness of the issues in the book, but also the radio program, which emphasizes and explores all these different areas. And that is also listed in the book.
Thank you. All right, well, I just want to thank everyone again for being present today and for your wonderful comments and discussion. I think that always adds to the reading. It's nice to hear the author read their work, and it's also doubly nice to hear everyone engaging in these discussions, because it just gives richness to this experience. So I appreciate that. And I want to invite you all as well. We have more small press author readings coming up. There's another one next Sunday by an author named Ruby McConnell about her memoir called Ground Truth. And she writes about the aftermath of the Mount St. Helens eruption in Oregon, about the changing landscape socially and culturally and things like that. So if you're interested in environmental studies or just interested in books that are about landscape and place, it'll be a wonderful reading. So these are all events are all free. They do require registration just so you have the right link to join, but you can find those on our website, and I'll drop that link in the chat box as well. And I just, again, Paula, thank you so much for sharing your words and your wisdom here today. And I wish you well, and everyone have a wonderful Sunday afternoon.
Thanks, Paula.
Thank you very much. And thank you everyone for joining us.